Some people accuse me of hating Mesas with an unreasonable passion. I am just totally biased against this one particular brand, and who knows why. I don't want to hate Mesas. I don't really hate Mesas. I prefer not to think about them very often. It's just that when they come in, they always come in for similar problems over and over again. And they do things which make repair bills much higher than they need to be, which affects you more than it affects me. I mean, it makes me more money. But, I'm trying to look out for my clients, the actual owners and players. So in my Amps Under $1,000 video, I gave a lot of examples of why Mesas can be very bad choices. And every photo and video I used in that example was from Mesas that I've had on my bench. And it was not one or two amps featured. That was like 7 different amps I showed in there. And that's the same problems over and over again. And I have a lot of friends who are techs. I have friends all over the world who are techs, very good techs, some of them better than me. And they hate Mesas too. Some of them refuse to work on them. It's nice to be able to afford to say, nope, I don't want to work on that. And Mesas make that list again and again. I'm not going to repeat everything I already covered in the previous video. This is a 3-channel dual rectifier, solo. And this one had relatively minor problems for Mesa, but the problems it had were pretty much typical of all Mesas to some degree or other. It had a failed tantalum cap that was here. It's been replaced with an electrolytic. I didn't find an axial that would fit there, so this is a 50-watt radial, very good quality Nishikon. Will never have a problem where the 1 microfarad tantalum failed. This amp has 4 J175 transistors used for muting and shunting, and of the 4 transistors, all 4 failed. Now, given that the fact that when those transistors failed, they put relatively high DC voltage on the grids of some tube stages, I think that might have been what took out this cathode bypass cap, the tantalum that's been replaced. And I replaced that 16 volt with a 50 volt. But all 4 of the J175 transistors failed. I don't know whether there was a surge in power that zapped them all, or whether they just were stored in humidity conditions that were bad for the little transistors. I don't know. I do know that a J175 is an obsolete part. And it was an obsolete part when it was put in this amp into service. Mesa does that. They hang on to legacy components much longer than other amp manufacturers do. And you end up getting parts which are hard to replace. They might have bought 1 million of these things. But you as a tech now, you find the obsolete parts and you order them. And you hope that you get some good ones. The first batch I got were bad. The second batch were just fine. And just a lot of problems in servicing this amp. For instance, this transistor is actually tied over here to this part of the circuit, and it's here a good 6 inches away. And there's no label on it. It just says J175 on the board. It doesn't say Q3 or anything. And there were 2 others over here that were bad, that were related to the stuff over here. So, you have a problem at this triode stage, but the components for that triode stage may be anywhere on the board, and say that this resistor is R170. Well, you can't see if that's R170 or not because the print is beneath the component. This amp might have had a problem with relay 3 based on the schematic. Relay 3 could have been one of the causes of the symptoms that this amp had. Well, is this relay 3? Is this relay 3? Or maybe it's over here, because you cannot see the part numbers on the board when the components are in place. So you know that these are all relays, but you don't know which one's relay 1, relay 4, relay 17, et cetera, et cetera. You don't know what resistor numbers are. You don't always know what the capacitor numbers are. You don't know whether a component for a stage is anywhere physically close to that stage. It's kind of a random layout. Anyway, once all those transistors were gone and there was no more voltage where it should not be, and that cathode bypass cap, which was failing, had been replaced. It did not burn, as tantalums often politely do to let you know which one is bad, but I had terrible hum on channel 2 and channel 3, which went away with channel 1. And the difference in this circuit was in channel 1, this larger 15 microfarad bypass cap was in parallel with the 1 microfarad, which tells me that that cap was working. And when you're on channel 2 or 3, this cap was out of the circuit, and the whole brunt of the cathode bypassing fell on that 1 microfarad, which was bad. So you had an unbypassed cathode, and you got hum injected from the heaters into the cathode, et cetera, et cetera. That's all been sorted, but every one of these little yellow tantalum caps will eventually fail, and they should have used a mixture of electrolytic and film, depending on the value needed. This channel also had a problem with a cap from grid to ground that failed, and it's one of these little cheap ceramic 1 kilovolt caps, which should never have failed 1 kilovolt, but it did, and it was actually shunting that input out occasionally almost to ground. It was like 100-something ohms away from ground. It didn't always happen. It happened when that capacitor got hot. I use 1 kilovolt ceramics all the time. I use Vichy's. They're very nice caps. They're about $1 each. I suspect that these little ones in here, which all tend to be a little bit microphonic, by the way, are not $1 each. And all these plastic standoffs, if this board does need to be pulled, they wear out, and eventually the board does not stay secure. You're not really getting the quality that you think you're paying for. But anyway, let's hear it now and see how the after is. So here's a clean. I'll put it in standby for the rest of this, but as you can hear, it was indeed quite loud. That was over 100 dB, I think. I didn't do it for very long. I'm going to get one of those wall-mounted dB meters like you see on that pedal show. So when you see an amp being played for real, you know, the whole setup where you see the amp and the cab and the mic, you'll get an idea of what the dBs are like. But I've actually got to get two. I've got to get one that hangs on the wall, and then I've got to get a handheld one so I can calibrate the one that hangs on the wall, because those wall-hung ones are just all over the map as far as calibration. Anyway, once these problems are removed, this amp sounds quite good. You know, it does what it says on the tin, and hopefully for the owner's sake, it will continue to do that for as long as he needs to have this amp working. I wish him nothing but the best with this. I hope this amp stays bulletproof. I just don't have a high surety of that. I stand behind my work, but there are a lot of potential ticking time bombs in these dual recs, and when they do fail, they tend to fail spectacularly for preventable reasons. Let me answer a few other commonly asked questions I get while I've got your attention. I'll do a video on an amp or talk about a particular possible choice in a price range, and people will often say, I wish you would do a video on this amp, or could you do a video on this amp, can you do this? I'm not really in position to take requests, as it were. I don't buy amps to feature on this channel. No one's sending me amps to go on YouTube. I feature the amps that come in for repair. So if you want me to do a review of a Space Modulator 0.73, when one comes in, I'll be glad to. Until then, I'm not going to seek one out to put on the YouTube channel. I'm not primarily a channel, I'm primarily a tech. And so you get what I get. I get a lot of really good amps from a wide spectrum of prices across many decades. So it's a pretty good sampling of what people in America tend to use, at least in Memphis, Tennessee. I think Memphis is a pretty good cross-section of the American guitar player preferences. So you'll see that we get a lot of Mesa that come in for problems. We get a lot of modern Marshalls that have problems, but not quite as drastic as the Mesas. And we get a lot of Deluxe Reverbs, many of which have been in constant use since 1972, and there's no reason for them to stop working every night for the next 30 years. I digress. Again and again, I'll see people asking the same question on the same video, or sometimes one guy will ask the same question in the comments on 3 different videos. I want to answer all comments, but I don't have as much time as someone who just does YouTube might have. So if you have a question about an amp, one particular video, look and see if that question has already been asked and answered in the comments, please, because I can only reply the same way so many times. And if you have a question, please don't post it in 3 or 4 different videos comments. Just one, and if I have time, I will answer it. And if I don't answer a comment, I'm sorry. I only have so much time. I don't see every comment, and I can't answer every comment. There are a lot of really good, knowledgeable players and some other techs in the comment section who often step in and give quite good answers. If I see an answer like that someone else gives, and I don't agree, or I think there's something incorrect, I'll try to point that out gently. And you can flip a coin, see if you go with my answer or the other guy's answer. But oftentimes, I agree with their answers, so I don't need to further comment. They got it. I like the idea that we're building a very small but focused community of guitarists and techs here who can talk to each other. So, if I get hit by a bus, you guys could probably continue on without me for a good while. Let's see, some other things. Let me get a sip of my coffee. Maxwell House, by the way, French roast. During the time of COVID, I was mail ordering a whole bunch of coffees, and I tried some very expensive things, some of which were quite nice. The Javalia especially is quite nice. But I found, much to my delighted surprise, that Maxwell House is a really good, inexpensive coffee, but particularly the French roast I like. So if that turns off some coffee snobs, I'm sorry. I think it's quite good. I'm not looking for espresso. When I first wake up in the morning, I'm barely able to use a drip coffee maker. I'm not going to be able to make myself an espresso. Espresso, not X. I try to be all cultured and like. Okay, on the Deluxe Reverb Tone Master video, there's some confusion about, I said it would have been nice if they'd given it a 50 watt or 100 watt option because it's set to 22 watts. And the data sheet for or the technical specs on the Fender website says 100 watts, and people don't understand what's happening there. And to their credit, it's tricky to understand because Fender does not make it clear, and there's a lot of confusion as to tube watts versus solid state watts. That's not really a thing. I've seen some reviews of the amp talking about how tube watts are louder than solid state watts. So you have to have a 100 watt amp to be as loud as a 22 watt tube amp. That's not the case. And I addressed that actually in more depth in the Amps Under $500 video. And maybe someday I'll do a video just on that subject. We'll have scopes and meters and measurements. But what the Fender amps are doing are they're using the same 100 watt ICE module in the Deluxe, the Twin, and the Super. It is the same solid state. They may use a higher power one in the Twin, I don't know. But they're using the same chip, which is capable of 100 watts. And depending on the output level of the model that they are modeling, let's call it that, they are limiting that maximum output. So the ICE module can put out 100 watts. The Deluxe Reverb is putting out about 22 watts clean, the same way a tube Deluxe Reverb is putting out 22 watts clean. A tube Deluxe Reverb will peak maybe about 30 if you really push it hard. But, the clean measurement is 22 watts-ish. And the solid state version is much in line with that. It is not going to 50 watts. It is not going to 100 watts. And one of the tells for that is that that model amp, the Deluxe Reverb Tone Master, comes with either the Neo 12K or the Neo Creamback. And the Neo 12K speaker is a 100-watt speaker. But the Creamback, the Neo Creamback, is a 65-watt speaker or a 60-watt speaker. And so if that Deluxe Reverb Tone Master was putting out 100 watts, they would not be using that 60 or 65-watt Creamback speaker. It would last about 10 minutes. So I understand the confusion, and some other channels that are doing reviews of that amp are adding to the confusion, because there are things that as a player that makes sense, that to a tech you're like, no, I understand why you'd think that, and but you don't have all the information. It's not putting out 100 watts. It could have. They could have given it another higher power mode. But I think if you had a 40 or 50 watt Deluxe Reverb Tone Master that did not have that compression on the attack, fewer people would need to buy the Twin. The difference between a 50 watt and an 85, 100 watt amp is marginal as far as stage volume goes. The difference between a 22 watt and an 85 watt is much more noticeable, especially going from a 1x12 to a 2x12. At the same time, you get that power increase. So I think if they felt that if they had put in a 50 or greater wattage option in the Deluxe Reverb with a very efficient speaker, which the Neo Creamback at least is, they might have hurt their Twin sales, because there's no real reason other than the mids control, which could be software adjusted. You could have that tweakable very easily for the Twin to sound any different than the Deluxe, but they do. There's some other differences between the Twin and the Deluxe as far as negative feedback and a few other little things, but they're very, very similar preamp circuits, and the voltages in them are different. And if Fender's modeled those voltage differences accurately, that'll reflect. So it's the same circuit behaving differently because of voltages and slight differences in negative feedback. I digress. I need to put that on a t-shirt. Sonic Audio, I digress. But I want to like the Tone Master. The one I played, the one with the Rev 1 firmware, I found lacking, and that was with the Neo 12K, which is a neodymium version of a speaker that I don't care for. So I'm open-minded. I'll try a Twin or a Super or another Deluxe, especially with the Rev 2 firmware and the other speaker, and maybe I'll have a happier report on the next one. But to my ears, and I play a lot of vintage Fenders I think the earliest I've had is 48. Most of them are 60s and 70s, though I've had a lot of Tweeds. I think I know how a Deluxe Reverb is supposed to feel at this point, even with a Strat off the wall of Guitar Center. And some guys were like, oh, you need to adjust the pickups. Yeah, that's where that's come from. You got the pickups too high. The pickups weren't high on that Strat, number one. Number two, I'm not going to go into Guitar Center or any music store and say, hey, may I do a video and take up some of your time without paying you? Bring me a screwdriver. I'm going to change all the pickup heights on the guitar on the wall. And also, I was trying to put myself in the position of a guitarist going in to potentially buy an amp and a guitar. So I got that Player's Strat off the wall, and I tuned it. That was the only change I made, was I tuned it. And I plugged it into the Deluxe Reverb Tone Master and went back to one of their little practice rooms. And I played it. And that's kind of what you would do, though most people don't ask to go to a practice room. They just play quietly on the floor or very loudly and often out of tune, in my experience, on the floor. So, I was 700 miles away from home. I wasn't going to be bringing my EJ Strat just to test that amp out. I didn't know I was going to be testing that amp out. I was just killing time in Johnson City, Tennessee, and I saw there was a Guitar Center, and I thought, I wonder if they got one of those little things to try out. And the guys were nice, and they let me. And I went in with an open mind. Another thing people say, you're just some old guy, you're set in your ways, you don't understand, you're afraid of technology. I've kind of answered that in a comment, but that would be wrong, kid. That would be very wrong. I'm incredibly up on technology. I have a high-tech background, and I'm open to good digital modelers. I just don't expect to get Kemper or Fractal performance at the $300 to $700 range. So I have tempered realistic expectations, but I am also willing to say when something sounds good. And from the modelers that I have played in that price range, the Katana, I think, sounds as good or maybe a little bit better for the cleans than the Deluxe Reverb. And the Katana's got a lot of other features. Longevity is probably not as good for the Katana as the Fender, but I don't know if it's great for any of them. Time will tell. Another thing, people are like, oh, the Katana's not a modeler, it's just a solid state amp. It's a tricky thing. It is not analog control over all parts of the circuit. So there is digital control over what the knobs do, and the effects are certainly modeled. As far as I have been able to read up on this, the amp models in the Katana are models from a previous Boss thing that they have brought into the Katana, and it is a blend of digital and analog circuits. And if Boss wants to send me the schematic, I'll be glad to report back, with some finality. Case closed. It is a modeler, or it is not a modeler, or it is a 60-40 blend, whatever. For the purpose of the amp videos where I mentioned the Katana, I featured the Katana as a possibility. If you Google amps under $500, that thing's going to come up. If you Google digital modeling amps, that thing's going to come up. It is the best-selling modeler amps so far. Possibly the Line 6 Spider outsold it, though no one wants to have one of those anymore. And I think the Fender is close on its heels for some good reasons. As I showed in my Fender video, there were some good sounds there. I just didn't like its response to all possible playing dynamics. But, if you search for modeling amps, you're going to have the Katana pop up. From the user's point of view, whether it's modeling or whether it's solid state with some digital modeling of effects, who cares? Is it a good sounding amp you can get for $300, $400? Yeah. Will it suit the same needs as something in the same price range that might be someone's definition of true modeling? Yeah. So, it's frustrating putting time into things on this channel. And then, actually come out of the woodwork. I don't know if anyone ever who never misspeaks or who never is trying to make a larger point and gets bogged down in the details. It's a tricky thing to do. And aside from the amps under X price videos, I don't script these. These are all free flow. So I'm just rhyming and styling. That's enough for now. I'll stop with my beats for a bit.